Did you know that a single policy decision can shake the foundation of the world's largest economy? That's exactly what just happened. Trump's latest move, framed as a bold strategy, may actually be a ticking time bomb with consequences far beyond Washington. From rising prices at your local grocery store to America's shrinking influence overseas, the ripple effects are already in motion. What makes this even more alarming is how unprepared most people are for what comes next. Today, we're breaking down 10 reasons why this mistake could change everything. Number one, tariffs backfire as hidden taxes. When most people hear the word tariff, they imagine it as a weapon aimed at foreign countries, especially rivals like China. The reality is far more complicated. A tariff is essentially a tax on imports, and the bill doesn't land on the desk of a foreign government. It lands on the businesses that bring those goods into the United States. And what do businesses do when their costs rise? They pass them along to consumers. That means ordinary Americans pay more every time they buy a product touched by tariffs. From electronics to clothing to groceries, prices quietly climb higher. This makes the promise of protecting American jobs sound appealing on the surface, but beneath it lies a hidden mechanism that actually squeezes the same working-class families it claims to defend. The danger of tariffs doesn't stop at higher prices. They create economic uncertainty that ripples through entire industries. Imagine running a company that depends on global supply chains. 1 month, tariffs add a 20% cost to your materials. The next month, it shifts again. How do you plan for growth when the rules of the game keep changing overnight? For many corporations, the answer is simple. They hold back. They delay building factories, they pause hiring, and they avoid risky long-term investments. That hesitation slows economic activity, and over time it drags on overall growth. Far from fueling a strong recovery, unpredictable tariff policies can stall the very momentum the economy needs to stay competitive on the world stage. There is also a political contradiction that makes tariffs even more damaging. Trump positioned himself as the champion against inflation, blaming his opponents for rising costs and winning support from millions who felt their wallets thinning at the grocery store. Yet by imposing tariffs, he adopted a strategy that inevitably pushes prices upward. That means the very tool he used to gain power clashes directly with the policies he now enforces. This is more than just an oversight. It reflects a structural misunderstanding of how modern economies function. Tariffs may sound tough in speeches, but on the ground they operate as stealth taxes, amplifying inflation and fueling frustration. For working families, it feels like being promised relief only to discover another hidden burden pressing down. Number two, global supply chain chaos. One of the least discussed but most damaging effects of Trump's tariff policies is the disruption they cause to global supply chains. Modern economies run on complex networks where parts and raw materials may cross multiple borders before becoming a finished product. A single car, for instance, might rely on steel from one country, electronics from another, and assembly in a third. When tariffs suddenly appear, those costs surge at every stage, creating a domino effect that multiplies by the time the product reaches the consumer. The chaos doesn't simply raise prices, it destabilizes the delicate web that businesses rely on to keep shelves stocked and production lines running. In a world already stressed by pandemics and geopolitical conflicts, throwing unpredictable tariffs into the mix deepens uncertainty and undermines economic stability. For corporations, this unpredictability translates into hesitation. Building a factory or shifting supply chains isn't something that can be done overnight. It takes years of planning and billions of dollars in investment. Yet if tariffs can change on a whim, climbing today, easing tomorrow, and returning the next week, how can companies make confident decisions? Many simply decide not to move forward. That means fewer new jobs, stalled infrastructure growth, and a chilling effect on technological innovation. Economists often emphasize that investment is the engine of long-term prosperity. When that engine is slowed by uncertainty, the result is weaker growth, not just for corporations, but for the entire national economy. The supposed short-term advantage of tariffs turns into a long-term handicap, leaving the U.S. less competitive in a global marketplace where consistency is valued as much as cost. The irony is that tariffs meant to make America stronger actually push opportunities elsewhere. Countries not trapped in unpredictable trade wars become more attractive to global investors. If a company can choose between setting up shop in a stable environment or one where tariff threats loom constantly, the choice is obvious. Over time, this diversion of capital strengthens competitors while leaving American industries struggling to catch up. What looks like a decisive political move is, in practice, an invitation for businesses to rethink their commitment to the United States. The ripple effect touches workers, consumers, and entire communities, making supply chain chaos not just an abstract policy debate, but a very real threat to livelihoods. Number 3, rising costs for everyday Americans. When tariffs are announced, politicians often frame them as penalties on foreign governments, but the truth is far less flattering. The bill lands on American households. Tariffs are essentially taxes on imported goods, and those costs are paid up front by U.S. businesses that bring products into the country. To protect their profits, these businesses raise prices, meaning everything from electronics to groceries to household goods becomes more expensive for everyday people. For a family already struggling with inflation, even a modest rise in costs adds pressure to a budget that is stretched thin. The average consumer doesn't see a tariff as an abstract economic policy. They see it in their grocery bill, their utility costs, and the price tag of the car they hope to buy. The danger is not only the immediate rise in prices, but also how tariffs quietly erode purchasing power. Wages for most Americans have been stagnant for decades, growing at a much slower pace than the cost of living. That means every increase in consumer prices pushes people further behind, forcing many to choose between essentials like healthcare, rent, and food. Economists note that this kind of squeeze often leads to rising personal debt as families lean on credit cards or loans to bridge the gap. Over time, household debt levels become unsustainable, leading to defaults, bankruptcies, and reduced economic mobility. In other words, tariffs accelerate the already growing divide between the wealthy and everyone else. The political irony is striking. Tariffs are often promoted as a way to protect American workers. Yet those very workers end up paying more for the basics of life, while the corporations that survive the tariff storm adjust by cutting jobs, relocating production, or passing every cost along. Instead of shielding the middle class, Tariffs create a hidden tax that hits them hardest. Unlike the wealthy, ordinary families can't absorb sudden spikes in costs without sacrificing something else. Whether it's postponing medical care, skipping vacations, or abandoning plans to buy a home, the burden is real and painful. What was marketed as a bold move for American prosperity turns into a policy that quietly drains the pockets of the very people it was supposed to help. Number 4, strain on small businesses. While large corporations often have the resources to adapt to new tariffs, small businesses bear the heaviest burden. Many of them rely on imported goods, parts, or raw materials that are suddenly subject to higher costs. Unlike multinational companies, they don't have the negotiating power to secure better deals or the cash reserves to weather prolonged increases in expenses. For a family-owned store, a local manufacturer, or a small online retailer, even a small jump in costs can force painful decisions, raising prices, cutting staff hours, or in many cases, closing down entirely. This creates a ripple effect, not only harming entrepreneurs, but also the communities that depend on them for jobs and services. The problem goes deeper than rising costs alone. Small businesses operate on thin margins, and tariffs destabilize their planning. If one month shipping costs rise because of tariffs, and the next month suppliers adjust with their own price hikes, a small business owner cannot forecast expenses or profits reliably. This uncertainty makes it risky to expand, invest in new equipment, or hire additional workers. In a healthy economy, small businesses are often called the backbone of growth, driving innovation and providing opportunities in local markets. But under tariff-heavy policies, that backbone weakens, as entrepreneurs are discouraged from taking risks when the rules of the game keep shifting without warning. Perhaps most concerning is how tariffs can inadvertently tilt the playing field toward big corporations. Larger firms can absorb tariff-related costs by diversifying their supply chains, shifting production abroad, or simply using their market dominance to pressure suppliers and customers. Small businesses lack these options, leaving them squeezed between higher import prices and consumers unwilling or unable to pay more. Over time, this dynamic concentrates economic power in the hands of a few giant companies, while independent businesses vanish. What was intended to protect American jobs instead undermines the very ecosystem that sustains them, deepening inequality and reducing economic diversity. For communities across the country, the disappearance of small businesses means fewer choices, less competition, and a loss of local character, a hidden but lasting consequence of tariffs that rarely makes headlines. Number 5, rising consumer prices. One of the most immediate and visible effects of tariffs is higher prices at the checkout counter. When companies face new taxes on imports, they almost never absorb the costs themselves. Instead, they pass them on to consumers in the form of more expensive goods. Everyday items, from clothing and electronics to household essentials, quickly become costlier. This hits middle and working class families the hardest because a larger portion of their income already goes toward necessities. What may seem like a modest increase on paper translates into real sacrifices in daily life, forcing families to cut back on spending or delay purchases they once considered routine. The ripple effect doesn't stop at household budgets. When consumer spending declines, the entire economy feels the slowdown. Retailers struggle with lower sales, restaurants see fewer customers, and service industries feel the pinch as disposable income shrinks. Rising prices also erode public confidence in the economy, as people begin to feel that no matter how hard they work, their money simply doesn't stretch far enough. In the past, strong consumer spending has been the engine of American growth, keeping businesses vibrant and fueling job creation. But tariffs create a drag on this engine, shifting money away from local businesses and into higher costs imposed by trade disputes. Longer-term inflationary pressure builds when tariffs remain in place, or even industries not directly tied to imports eventually feel the strain because the supply chain is interconnected. For example, a tariff on steel makes cars and appliances more expensive. A tariff on electronics raises the cost of medical equipment and everyday gadgets. Over time, rising prices ripple across multiple sectors, creating what economists call cost-push inflation. This type of inflation doesn't stem from increased demand, but from higher production costs, which are ultimately paid by consumers. Once prices rise, they rarely fall back to their previous levels, meaning households carry that burden indefinitely. What began as a political strategy to look tough on trade morphs into an everyday tax on millions of ordinary people, invisible on their pay stubs, but painfully clear in their grocery bills and monthly expenses. Number 6, business uncertainty. One of the most damaging consequences of Trump's tariff policies is the uncertainty they create for businesses. Companies rely on long-term planning when deciding where to build factories, how much to invest, or whether to expand into new markets. These decisions often involve billions of dollars and years of preparation, but when tariffs are announced unpredictably, then altered, removed, or reinstated, it throws entire strategies into chaos. A manufacturer considering whether to move production from Mexico to the US might hesitate if there's a chance tariffs will vanish next year. Likewise, a small business that imports materials cannot confidently price its products when costs fluctuate with every policy shift. This environment of unpredictability discourages investment and slows economic growth. The problem is compounded by the global nature of modern supply chains. A single product, like a smartphone, can involve dozens of suppliers from multiple countries. When tariffs disrupt even one link in that chain, the cost and time required to complete the product rises. Businesses must either absorb these costs, which reduces profitability, or pass them to consumers, which risks losing customers. Neither choice is appealing. Moreover, the uncertainty makes U.S. companies less competitive compared to firms in countries with stable trade policies. Investors, too, are wary of instability, often redirecting funds to markets perceived as safer and more predictable. The result is capital flight. Money that could have fueled American innovation and job creation instead flows abroad. This unpredictability also erodes trust in U.S. economic leadership. For decades, global firms looked to America as a reliable partner in commerce, a place where rules were clear and contracts were honored. Tariff policies that shift overnight weaken that perception. Countries like China or members of the European Union may respond by forging stronger alliances among themselves, leaving the United States isolated. Meanwhile, domestic businesses adopt a defensive posture, holding back on hiring or wage increases because they fear tomorrow's headlines could undo today's decisions. Over time, uncertainty becomes a silent tax on growth. It doesn't show up in budget lines or balance sheets, but it strangles ambition and suffocates the bold investments that once fueled the American economy. Number 7. Strain on American workers. While tariffs are often promoted as tools to protect American jobs, the reality is that they can place heavy burdens on the very workers they claim to help. When imported goods and materials become more expensive, many U.S. industries struggle to stay competitive. Take manufacturing. Higher steel and aluminum costs mean companies that make cars, appliances, or construction equipment face shrinking profit margins. To cope, firms may cut jobs, freeze wages, or automate tasks more quickly than planned. Workers who hoped tariffs would shield them from global competition instead find themselves squeezed with less job security and fewer opportunities for advancement. The supposed safety net becomes a trap. This strain is not limited to factories. Service workers, truck drivers, dock workers, and retail employees all feel the ripple effects. Higher input costs trickle down into higher consumer prices, which reduces demand. When families must pay more for groceries, clothes, or electronics, they cut back on discretionary spending like dining out or travel. That slowdown hits restaurants, airlines, hotels, and countless small businesses, leading to reduced hours and layoffs. For workers, the pain often arrives twice, first in their paychecks and then at the checkout counter when everything costs more. This cycle widens inequality, leaving the middle and lower classes carrying the heaviest load. Beyond economics, there's also a psychological toll. American workers are told that tariffs will make their jobs more secure, yet reality rarely matches the promise. As industries struggle with reduced demand or international retaliation, entire communities can suffer. Regions dependent on farming, manufacturing, or shipping are particularly vulnerable, with job losses piling up despite political assurances. This mismatch between rhetoric and reality erodes trust, leaving workers disillusioned and angry. Over time, that frustration fuels political and social division as people search for scapegoats to explain their hardships. Instead of creating stability, tariffs often deepen instability, making workers feel abandoned in a system they were told would protect them. Number 8, global retaliation. Every action in trade provokes a reaction. When the U.S. imposes tariffs on foreign goods, other countries rarely stay silent. They often respond with tariffs of their own, targeting key American industries. For example, if Washington raises duties on Chinese electronics, Beijing may retaliate by taxing U.S. agricultural products like soybeans or corn. That's not accidental, it's strategic. Foreign governments design their countermeasures to hit industries tied to politically important regions of the United States, putting pressure directly on the administration that started the conflict. Farmers, who often rely heavily on exports, end up as collateral damage, losing billions in sales because foreign markets suddenly close. This retaliation doesn't just affect big-ticket industries. It seeps into smaller markets and disrupts local economies. American wine growers, dairy farmers, and textile producers may find themselves locked out of overseas markets where they once thrived. When demand drops, production slows, and workers are laid off. Retaliation also sparks uncertainty in global supply chains, as foreign suppliers redirect their goods to friendlier markets, while shunning U.S. partners. Over time, the reputation of the United States as a dependable trade ally is eroded. Competitors like the European Union India, or Brazil seize the opportunity to deepen their ties with countries that once preferred doing business with America. The cost of global retaliation is not only economic, but also diplomatic. Trade conflicts create rifts between allies, straining relationships that took decades to build. Instead of uniting against shared challenges like climate change or security threats, countries expend energy on tit-for-tat trade battles. These divisions weaken the United States' ability to lead on the global stage. For ordinary Americans, the consequences are clear. Fewer jobs, weaker industries, and higher costs for everyday goods. What was framed as a policy to strengthen America instead exposes it to international isolation. Retaliation is not just blowback. It's a reminder that in an interconnected world, no nation can act alone without facing consequences.
Number 9. Inflationary pressure. One of the most direct and painful effects of tariffs is their tendency to fuel inflation. When the cost of imported goods rises due to tariffs, companies pass those extra expenses on to consumers. Everyday necessities, from electronics to clothing to groceries, suddenly become more expensive. For families already living paycheck to paycheck, even small increases in prices can force tough choices. Cutting back on healthcare visits, skipping vacations, or delaying major purchases. Over time, this steady upward push in costs erodes the real value of wages. Workers may see the same number on their paychecks, but their money stretches less and less, creating frustration and financial strain across the country. The problem worsens because inflation triggered by tariffs doesn't remain confined to imported goods. Once prices rise in one sector, other sectors follow. A restaurant facing higher costs for imported kitchen equipment or ingredients might raise menu prices. A construction company paying more for imported steel may increase bids on new housing projects, which trickles down into higher rents and mortgages. Inflation spreads like a domino effect, leaving no corner of the economy untouched. And unlike temporary shocks, such as fuel price spikes, tariff-driven inflation often lingers because businesses adjust their pricing models for the long term. For policymakers, inflationary pressure creates political headaches. Leaders who promise lower costs and economic relief are suddenly forced to explain why groceries, gas, and basic goods cost more. Central banks may respond by raising interest rates to control inflation, but that slows growth and makes borrowing more expensive for households and businesses alike. The ripple effects are damaging. Fewer home buyers, reduced small business investments, and rising credit card debt. What started as a political maneuver to protect American jobs ends up undermining the economic stability of millions. Inflation is not an abstract concept. It shows up in every receipt, every bill, and every strained family budget.
Number 10, weakening U.S. leadership. For decades, the United States projected itself as the anchor of the global economy, a nation that upheld stability, free trade, and predictability. But tariff-driven policies have chipped away at that reputation. When America imposes sweeping tariffs and shifts its rules unpredictably, it sends a signal to the world that the U.S. is no longer a steady leader, but rather an unpredictable actor. Allies who once relied on Washington's consistency begin exploring alternative partnerships, while rivals like China and Russia seize the opportunity to present themselves as more reliable economic partners. The long-term cost of this reputational damage may outweigh the short-term short-term political wins of any tariff policy. Weakening leadership has concrete consequences. International organizations such as the World Trade Organization and G20 function best when the U.S. plays a guiding role. Without firm leadership, these institutions falter, leaving space for other powers to shape the rules of global commerce. Already, countries within BRICS have accelerated efforts to create alternatives to U.S.-dominated financial systems, from trade agreements to digital currencies. The loss of influence makes it harder for America to negotiate favorable terms, protect its industries, or maintain its technological edge. Businesses across the globe begin planning with the assumption that the U.S. is no longer the default hub for innovation and investment. For ordinary Americans, the weakening of U.S. leadership translates into reduced opportunities and declining influence. Jobs tied to exports shrink as other nations bypass American markets. Travel, education, and cultural exchanges lose momentum as trust in the U.S. wanes. At home, citizens may not immediately notice the erosion of global power, but over time, it manifests in smaller paychecks, fewer global opportunities, and a diminished sense of security. The great irony is that tariffs, marketed as a way to strengthen the United States, may instead accelerate its decline as a global leader. A weakened position on the world stage doesn't just harm America's image, it threatens its prosperity for generations to come. The picture is clear. Trump's latest decision is not just a political gamble, it's an economic earthquake waiting to happen. Each of the 10 reasons we explored points to the same reality. What looks like strength on the surface is in fact weakening the very foundations of America's economy and global standing. From inflation at home to retaliation abroad, from job insecurity to eroding trust, the costs are mounting in ways that can't simply be brushed aside. What makes this moment so critical is the combination of risks. One mistake doesn't exist in isolation. It triggers a chain reaction. Higher tariffs create uncertainty. Uncertainty discourages investment, and global retaliation closes doors that once fueled American growth. Add to that the strain on workers and the decline of U.S. leadership, and you see why economists warn that the fallout could last for decades, not just years. Yet, the most dangerous factor of all may be denial, the refusal to face uncomfortable truth. Pretending the U.S. can act alone in an interconnected world only speeds up the decline. Real solutions will require honesty, cooperation, and the courage to rethink policies that sound strong but leave the nation weaker. If there's one takeaway, it's this: America is at a crossroads. The path chosen today will shape not just the economy, but the future of millions of families. The real question is whether leaders and citizens are ready to confront reality before it's too late.